The top 10 action movies from the 80s? What's the deal? Hi, I'm Jeff Tucker, and this is What's the Deal Movie Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a top 10 countdown of the best action movies from the 80s. Not the highest grossing movies necessarily, but my favorite top 10 action movies. There were so many great action movies that came out of the 80s, it was really hard to narrow this list down to just 10. So what I try to do is I excluded movies that kind of crossed into several genres. A great example is Star Wars. The original films are some of my all-time favorite movies, but they would really dominate this list, so I kind of decided to leave them out and just concentrate on pure action movies. With that in mind, let's get started. Starting off at number 10 is Predator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now in this movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a commando by the name of Dutch, who is the commander of a special forces group that's sent into South America to basically rescue some hostages taken by these guerrilla forces. After they defeat the guerrilla forces, they find out the entire mission is bogus because there's no hostages, and Arnold decides to pull his team out. As they make their way to the extraction point, members of the team start getting picked off one by this somewhat invisible, super technologically advanced alien who is essentially hunting them. Eventually, the movie boils down to a 1v1 with Arnold Schwarzenegger versus the alien. Great action movie, really well shot, and some excellent scenes in South America. Definitely worth the 10th spot on this list. Coming in at number 9 is Red Dawn, starring Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen. Now, this movie takes place in kind of an alternate timeline in the 80s when the Russians and a few other South American countries have banded together to invade the United States. Charlie Sheen and a few of his high school friends follow Patrick Swayze, his older brother, into the mountains to form a resistance group called the Wolverines, which is based off of their school mascot. Through the movie, Charlie Sheen and his group of Wolverines essentially do hit-and-run ambush moves on the Russians and essentially do their part to kind of make a stand against the invading army. For some reason, during the summer as I was growing up, TNT played this movie every single day, and more days than not, I watched every bit of it. Great action movie and definitely worth a watch. Coming in at number 8 is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, starring Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. In the third installment of the original movies, basically Harrison Ford's dad, played by Sean Connery, has gone missing while he's looking for the Holy Grail, which is basically a cup that was used by Jesus Christ and should enable its users to kind of give them everlasting life. So Harrison Ford sets out to find his father, who ends up being captured by the Nazis. The Nazis are also on a quest to capture the Holy Grail. They believe its powers would give it the edge they need to essentially take over the world. So Harrison Ford sets out on an epic mission to basically beat the Nazis to finding the Holy Grail. One of Harrison Ford's best movies in my opinion, and definitely one of the best Indiana Jones movies. Worth the watch if you haven't seen it. Coming in at number 7 is Lethal Weapon, starring Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. This is the first in the installment of what would eventually become one of the greatest action series ever filmed. The movie starts off with Danny Glover playing Murdoch, who is a kind of an older, wiser, more mature police officer, and being assigned a partner in Mel Gibson, who plays Riggs, a kind of a suicidal ex-special forces guy who's kind of hot on the trigger and a little bit unreliable. They hate each other at first. Eventually, Danny Glover's daughter gets kidnapped by these drug smugglers that Mel Gibson and him were investigating, and Riggs and Murdoch have to learn to work together in order to kind of take them down. The entire Lethal Weapon series is great, and this is really a good first movie to kick it all off. Definitely worth a watch. Awesome movie. Coming in at number 6 is RoboCop, starring Peter Weller. So this movie is set in a near-future dystopian, crime-ridden city of Detroit, or just Detroit as we know it. So Peter Weller plays a cop that's gunned down in his prime and then turned into a cyborg, ass-kicking crime fighter by the name of RoboCop. He eventually goes around and starts cleaning up the streets of Detroit and even tracks down the man who shot him originally. They made a few follow-up movies to this one that were kind of hit and miss, but the original RoboCop was just an awesome movie. I highly recommend watching it if you haven't seen it yet. Coming in at number 5 is Terminator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, this is another movie that kicked off a really awesome franchise of movies, and the original really is one of the best. In this movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a cyborg sent back to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, before she can give birth to John Connor, who will eventually go on to lead the humans in a resistance against the machine war in the future. The resistance is able to send back a soldier to protect Sarah Connor, Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn. Then the movie becomes a little paradoxical as Kyle Reese actually sleeps with Sarah Connor, and then their son is John Connor. A little bit confusing, but that doesn't stop this movie from being one of the greatest action movies of the 80s, and definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it yet. Coming in at number 4 is all 3 of the original Rambo movies. Now, I won't go into the plot because that would take way too long, but essentially John Rambo is played by Sylvester Stallone, who is a PTSD-stricken vet who's come back from Vietnam. Through the series of 3 movies, he basically goes back to Vietnam eventually to rescue a bunch of POWs, and then even goes to Afghanistan to kick some Russian ass. While these movies are a little bit over the top at times, they're really quintessential 80s action. Sylvester Stallone does a great job in really playing the super macho Rambo who does his best to kill everybody in his path. All 3 movies are really just worth the watch if you haven't seen them yet. Coming in at number 3 is Alien, starring Sigourney Weaver. Now, this is actually the second movie in the series. However, the first and all the ones after the second one are kind of more of a horror genre, really suspense thrillers. The second one, however, is a great action movie. Sigourney Weaver revisits her role as Ripley, where she accompanies a group of colonial marines back to the original moon, where they picked up the alien in the first movie. These Marines completely underestimate the aliens and eventually get their asses kicked. Sigourney Weaver has to step up, kick some alien ass. Just an awesome movie, really great action, and I think one of the best of the series. Coming in at number 2 is Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis plays the New York City police officer John McClane, who is accidentally invited to his wife's Christmas party in LA. While he's there, a group of East Germans take over the tower, and he basically has to hide out and survive and stop them from blowing up the building and stealing all the money, and of course saving his wife. One of the greatest action movies of all times. Forget the year, forget the genre. Die Hard is one of my all-time favorite movies, and if you haven't seen it, what are you doing with your life? Before we get to number 1, I really feel like there's one movie that didn't make the list but deserves an honorable mention, and that's Commando, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, the movie's plot is a little bit over the top. It's full of one-liners, and there's some questionable physics, but this is an awesome action movie, and while it's not in the top 10, I think it definitely is worth watching. So coming in at the top action movie from the 80s is Top Gun, starring Tom Cruise. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are rolling your eyes and saying, hey, this isn't really even that great of an action movie, but to me, it's the best action movie in the 80s. Tom Cruise plays this hotshot, fly-by-the-seat-of-his-pants pilot by the name of call sign of Maverick. Really, the entire movie is one huge cliche, but it's really just one of the top movies of the 80s and one of my all-time favorite movies. If you haven't seen it, totally worth watching, and my favorite action movie from the 80s. So that's my top 10 action movie list from the 80s. What did you think? Was there some awesome action movie from the 80s that was missing out? What's in your top 10 list? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe. I'm Jeff Tucker. This has been What's the Deal Movie Reviews. Thanks for watching.